thought it was about time I did a video on sanders, this being one of the most important tools us DIYers can have in our toolbox. And this isn't a review video, this is me going through all the sanders that I own, explaining why I own them and what I've used them for over the years. And there's another reason I want to do this video today. There's one sander that's been an absolute game changer for my DIY since I started using it a year ago. So if any of you lot are in the market for a new sander, you might find this video useful. And finally, I should mention I haven't been paid anything by anyone to do today's video or to feature any of these products. That's the way I like it, because this way I get to create an honest, impartial video. So let's have a quick run through of the sanders that have served me so well over the years. First up, we've got this Bosch sheet or orbital sander. I've owned two of these over the years. The first one I was 8 years old, and I would say this is probably the current updated version. Might be doing this a little bit of a disservice. It's, I would say, the least effective sander I'm going to feature today, but even so, that's still more effective than sanding by hand. Now, the bed of this sander rotates in a tight orbit of about 2mm diameter if this current version is anything to go by. This makes this sander quite good for sanding large flat areas of material, but the problem with it is, because of those tight orbital wiggles, if you're unlucky you can get little circular scratches in the surface you're sanding. But don't completely knock it, because I use it to very good effect on our bedroom floor, having just laid engineered oak floorboards. You might have seen the video, but I got myself into a real mess because I spot sanded a few little marks and scuffs on the surface before staining. And what that did is it put those little areas of the surface at a finer grade of sanding to the rest of the floor. So when I stained it, the stain didn't take to those areas, with the result that I got loads of horrible patches all over the floor. So I used this sander to sand back all the affected floorboards. But I did get those circular scratches, as you've just seen. What else have I used this for over the years? Well, I've used it to sand filler. It's reasonably effective at that, but I'm not going to go into too much detail because there are sanders that are better at this on this list, as you'll see in a minute. But the problem with this particular sander, some of them have a hook and loop fastening system, but this one has these clamps. My original one actually had wire clips that clamp the sanding sheets in place. And because of that, over the years I've been very tempted, rather than to buy the actual sheets that it was designed for, which have little perforations in so that the dust can be taken away into the dust bag at the back. I don't actually know whether this one ever had a dust bag. Instead, I've just used rolls of sandpaper like this, cut them to size and put them onto the sander. The end result being the dust extraction system, such as it is, has been completely ineffective, meaning I've had to rely on a separate handheld vacuum. This is my fault, not the tools, but I'm sure there are lots of people out there who've done the same. However, with this updated PSS 250, with its hook and loop system, you wouldn't be tempted to do that. Although actually, whether you can hook a vac up to the dust extraction port at the back rather than use the one that comes with it, I don't know. Maybe let me know in the comment section if you've got one of these. So next up, we've got this Trend Detail Orbital Sander. Yes, it orbits like the Bosch, albeit half as many orbits per minute, being 18 volts. But the shape of it makes it much more useful to get into tricky corners. And also it's 18 volt rather than 240. So I think it's much more useful than one of these, and with the right sandpaper, you can achieve reasonably good abrasive power with a little tool like this. And to date, I haven't had any of those circular scratches that I got with the other one. Now, I'll come on to the importance of sandpaper in a minute, but I'm a big fan of these Trend Zirconium, Aluminium Oxide and Mesh sanding sheets, which in my experience are so much more durable than the cheaper sheets that you can buy in huge quantities from companies like Amazon. Now, I used this a lot on this week's job, stripping down my daughter's old utility furniture cupboard to get into tricky corners and to sand areas that I didn't want the power of the random orbit sander we'll come on to in a minute. But I was a bit underwhelmed by it when I tried to use it to get into the corners and up close to skirting boards when sanding my daughter's floor. So the point to make here, it's horses for courses. This little tool will really excel when you use it for the right job with the right sandpaper. And next up, we've got the Powerfile Belt Sander. This was the original. Again, I got this when I was about 8 or 9, and then I bought this about 15 years later. A sander that got me seriously excited back in the 80s, mainly because as a kid, the zoomed in marketing photos made this look like a massive chainsaw for sanders. Get it out of the box and it was a little bit more underwhelming. But with a fast moving sanding belt, you'll always get fantastic performance with a tool like this. I used this so much back then, and for a lot of jobs where a sander with a larger sanding bed would have been much more appropriate. But like anything, with a bit of practice you get a great finish, even for a job it perhaps wasn't intended for. As you'd imagine, you keep a tool like this in your toolbox for jobs that nothing else can do, as a result of which I don't actually use it very often these days. I once used this to trim a fore end on the mortise lock on a friend's front door, where the frame had moved and so the mortise wasn't engaging properly. It was a quick fix to get the lock to engage. It's also useful to grind down the diameter of screws when you're trying to screw a decent sized screw into a wall to hang a heavy mirror that has slotted mirror plates on the back, but where you can't actually fit a decent sized screw through the mirror plate. And now we move on to my old Bosch PBS 60 belt sander. Far and away the tool that I've spent the most man, or should I say boy, hours over the years using. And arguably the tool that's now responsible for my tinnitus, as I used it without ear protection, sanding down the floorboards of my old place in London. So apart from the floorboards, the jobs I've used it for over the years include fine-tuning mitre cuts, fine-tuning scribes where the jigsaw has left a bit that needs trimming back and the block plane can't get into the curve, shaping pegs to fill screw holes or misplaced holes that needed re-drilling, grinding down screws as we just saw with the smaller power file, but for which this belt sander is much more effective. As with all the sanders featured today, sanding belts are obviously available in a variety of grits from 60 right up to, well, I think I've used about 600 grit on this old belt sander. Although you do need to be careful to order the right belt length and width if you don't buy manufacturer's own, as I've been caught out in the past ordering the wrong stuff for this sander. Now, belt sanders like this are difficult to beat in terms of abrasive power, and so you do need to be careful with them, because particularly with the coarse grit sandpapers you can accidentally take off a lot when you're sanding. But as with all things, practice makes perfect, and the key is to clamp everything down so you've got a nice firm object to sand. And I like the sanding surface to be at eye level so I can see exactly what I'm removing. And in that situation you can even use something like this, as I did, to get a straight edge before I discovered my electric planer. Now, the old Bosch is starting to show signs of aging now. I've had to replace the drive belt a couple of times, and the knob which adjusts the position of the sanding belt is loose, and so the sanding belt wanders. So I recently upgraded to this 18-volt Ryobi. Ryobi because, as you might know if you watch a lot of my videos, I do have a lot of Ryobi batteries, using these tools for so many years. This was the first cordless belt sander on the market, certainly at this width of sanding belt at any rate, and weirdly very few manufacturers, if any, seem to have followed Ryobi's lead. Comparing it against the up-to-date 240 volt Bosch, you can see it loses 100 meters per minute on the belt speed, and whilst the weights are similar, the 18 volt version dwarfs the 240 volt in terms of belt size. It was a little tricky hunting down the slightly strange 76 by 457mm sanding belts for it, if I'm honest. And I ended up finding these, again, trend sanding belts, I think on Toolstation. And you can see me here using it to shape the curved angles in places 54mm thick of an MDF headboard I recently made for my daughter's refurbished bedroom. For this sort of job, no other tool would really get the job done. And so we're on to the final section of this video, featuring my random Orbit sander. The sander which, if I'm honest, was the excuse in the first place for making this video, and which I'm so desperate to tell you all about because, quite frankly, I'm gutted I didn't find out about this earlier. I've only owned this for about a year now, but it's been an absolute game changer and has quickly become my main sander of choice, replacing even my belt sander for a lot of the jobs that I thought only my belt sander was capable of doing. But isn't it just another orbital sander, I hear you ask? Well, no. An orbital sander moves only in tiny circular orbits. The bed itself doesn't spin or rotate. Whilst with the random orbit sander, as the name suggests, not only does it rotate in tiny orbits like the orbital sander, but also the entire bed rotates or spins back and forth. And crucially, as a result of these two separate motions, it's less likely to leave those little orbital scratches that you saw on my bedroom floor earlier, and it's much more powerful. So let's talk about a few jobs that I've used this for in the last year since I've owned it, and why I love it so much. The wardrobe build fascias. Sanding down some really big level differences, I was able to get these flat in a matter of seconds with much more control than I would have got with the belt sander. Remember what I was saying earlier about the worry of taking off too much wood with the belt sander. I use it exclusively now for sanding down MDF edges before painting, and I've done a video on this, a link to which is coming up on screen now. And my daughter's bedroom floor, yes, I sanded down her entire floor a couple of weeks ago, which has been carpeted ever since it was laid in the 70s, and more recently when we replastered the room, covered in splatters of plaster. And last week I sanded down this post-World War II utility furniture cupboard, which I'd stripped but which had a layer of varnish that needed removing. But why is this sander so good? Well, it gives you up to 15 minutes of sanding with a 5Ah battery, but that's just marketing spiel. For me, the remarkable thing about this sander is its sheer power. It has amazing dust extraction when connected to a Henry vacuum, or in my case, in my daughter's room, the Cyclone vac that I built, a link to which is coming up on screen now. Sanding that entire floor in my daughter's room, there literally wasn't a single speck of sand or sawdust that the vacuum didn't extract. And that is a real game changer when you're using something like this inside your house. And being 18 volts, as you again see with me zooming around the floor with it, it's ultra portable. Now, one thing you might not appreciate about a sander like this, as I hinted about at the start, but which I only just recently discovered, is the benefits of that dual action. If you gently hover over the surface, you can take advantage of the fast spinning action, or for a less destructive random orbit, you can switch the tool on with it firmly engaged on the surface. Sandpaper is freely available from the big recognised brands, right through to the unbranded stuff you saw earlier that I bought from Amazon. The only thing I would say to you, experience-wise, from sanding my daughter's floor is I got through so much of these cheap, unbranded sanding discs that I bought from Amazon. It wears out really quickly in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. Whereas the Trend discs, whilst being a lot more expensive, lasted, I don't know, at least 10 times as long. I know I've mentioned Trend a lot in this video. They haven't paid me anything for that. Chance would be a fine thing. But I do find their products far superior to the other non-branded stuff. So it does pay to invest in good quality sanding discs. So if you're currently wondering what sort of sander to buy for your DIY tasks, I would say this is a fantastic starting point because it covers so many jobs. You don't need to buy Ryobi. There are so many different manufacturers producing these things. And obviously, if you've got an existing battery system, then that would heavily influence your choice. Although with offers like this at the time of making this video, without battery, there's a lot to be said for the Ryobi unit. So get searching on the internet, and if you've already got one of these, please let me know in the comment section below which one you've got and why you like it so much. So that's it for today. I hope you found this useful. As usual, I'll post details of everything I've talked about in the description below the video, which of course you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow, and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. Just a quick reminder before the end, you can help support me on my Buy Me a Coffee page. A link to that will be in the description. And for a regular monthly membership, you can access my DIY Discord forum where you can talk to me and the rest of our amazing community about the projects you're working on or any questions you've got. And finally, as I always say, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon!